Wednesday, November the 17th at 6 o'clock.
It's kind of a tasting in two parts. We just got a brand new ESB, and you know we have to taste it whenever we get ESB. This is by Cannery Brewing out of Naramata, BC, and this is their Regicide of the Star King. Awesome beer name, possibly my favorite beer name this year. It's a fresh hopped ESB. We had it earlier today. It's definitely got that malty backbone, but it's got this beautiful, bright, hoppy aroma right on top. And that got me thinking a little bit. What other beer reminds me of just that? Well, it's Annex Meats and Bounds, one of the original launch beers for Annex, and as was recently announced, it's not going to be around much longer as a core beer. It's being moved to be a seasonal. The Idle Hands Pilsner is taking over in the core lineup, and the Meats and Bounds is being retired. But before it goes away, I think we should give it a proper send-off, and we'll taste it against the brand new Regicide of the Star King. On the other side, we're going to do some sweeter porters and stouts. Keeping with the Annex theme, we have their Comfortable Deception. This is their sweet potato porter, which is kind of their take on a pumpkin beer, and I gotta say, I like it a lot better than pumpkin beer. It's certainly got the sweetness, it's got that gourdy note, and it's certainly got the spices, but it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just they don't call it a pumpkin beer. I liked it a lot better. That's going to be a lot of fun. And then, returning from last year, one of our best-selling beers every winter, Snake Lake's Ice Cutter, their Vanilla Latte Stout. This beer really needs no introduction. Big, sweet, tons of vanilla, really nice coffee notes. Absolute winner, and now they finally listened and got rid of their silly six-pack, so now in four-pack tall cans as God intended. So here we are, one heck of a lineup. All this and more coming up Wednesday, November the 17th at 6 o'clock. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday night beer tasting. And as I said in the promo, it is a bit of a tasting in two parts. We have got a little bit of an ESB thing going on one side and a stout and porter thing going on the other. So we're going to start off with something old and something new. With something old, we have Annex's Meats and Bounds, and this will be our very first beer. This was old because this was one of the very first launch beers for Annex and the very last one of their original core range that's left. And as I said in the promo, it is no longer going to be part of the core range. In terms of something new, this is the brand new fresh hop ESB from Cannery Brewing, which is called Regicide of the Star King. In Mike's opinion, this is a very good ESB, but he still preferred the Category 12 Pivotal because the Category 12 Pivotal was just incredible. So let's open with Annex Meats and Bounds. Now this is a style of beer that I don't think anybody uses the term XPA anymore, experimental pale ale or extra pale ale. The very first one of these that I saw, and don't hate me for naming the brewery, but wow, don't hate me for pouring like an idiot either, was actually from AleSmith, who launched their XPA. And XPAs were supposed to be kind of a different take, somewhere between an IPA and a pale ale, kind of like a bigger, richer pale ale, but not as over the top as an IPA. They were supposed to be maltier, richer, kind of like a more modern interpretation of an ESB, where we have that firm malt backbone, but then we're adding in a little bit more aggressive hopping than was common at the time. Now, of course, these days, malt backbones have really changed. You know, West Coast IPAs are out, super juicy hazies are in. So the XPA, while it's a cool style, it's even the style of beer that it was kind of riffing on, the old school West Coast pale like say a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and a classical West Coast IPA like a Bear Republic Racer 5 or a Red Racer IPA or something even like an old school Tree Hophead. That style of beer really isn't in the public consciousness anymore. So the need to have a beer that really fits neatly between those doesn't really exist anymore. So we kind of have, why do we still have Meats and Bounds? Well, tragically, we kind of don't anymore. What it is at its core is a slightly malty, kind of pale ale, kind of an IPA, 6% alcohol, big, rich. I actually had a pint of this on Tuesday when I was at Annex, just because Meats and Bounds, I'm gonna miss you. And I think you'll notice right away on the nose on this, big malt. Like there's hops here, but the initial nose for me is big cereal grain. It's a very nice, clean barley sugar sort of character. The beer is, well, it's not exactly clear, but it's not as hazy as a hazy IPA traditionally would be. And it's a little tiny touch darker than most IPAs as well. And it just smells sweet and balanced and rich. It's definitely a more modern interpretation of the style than an ESB, but I still really like it. What's it like on draft? I think it tastes a little brighter. I will say, out of the can, of all of our Annex SKUs that we get in the store, Meats and Bounds is easily the slowest selling. What's our packed on date on this guy? Yeah, this was packed in May, so it's a few months old now, tail end of May. So, and that's, I think this is actually even a fresh flat that I ordered in from Connect. This wasn't off our shelves, this was something I brought in new, so if the stuff up at Connect is getting to be, brewed in May, you kind of understand why it might not be in the regular rotation anymore. But I did have it on, and yeah, the malt backbone was maybe a little more muted. The hops were a little more on top. It wasn't quite so rich and earthy. It was a little bit brighter. Oh, interesting question from Chris Hunt. What's the origin of India in India Pale Ale, and does it still mean they're the same thing, or are modern IPAs their own thing? Great question. Now, the back of label of an IPA can will tell you that, oh, well, this is a modern interpretation of an old style, where India Pale Ales, they'd brew these high alcohol, heavily hopped beers in England, and they were both for the British troops stationed in India at the time, this would be in the 19th century, but also for the sailors who were going to be drinking beer, if they weren't drinking rum, on the long voyage for the East India Company, shipping goods from the UK to India and back. That was certainly true. They certainly did brew a higher alcohol beer, and they certainly did pack it with a lot more hops. But the beers we made basically inverted to how we make them now. Now we had a very small amount of hops at the start of the boil to add a little bit of bitterness and a little bit of backbone, and then we had a whole lot for aroma and flavor. Whereas the beers that were made 200 years ago would have been the exact opposite. They would have had a lot of hops added at the beginning to maximize bitterness, not because bitter was the preferred flavor, but one, seawater, just because they were being shipped in big leaky wooden galleons, and two, just the fact that it had to survive seawater and heat and time and the motion of being in a ship. And then once they got to India, they weren't exactly stored cold. They needed a whole bunch of preservative in that beer, and that's why they added so much hops. Now, these India Pale Ales did catch on with the British beer drinking public at the time, and for a little while there was a bit of a craze of India Pale Ales. But by the Second World War, the style had effectively completely died out. There really weren't any, I mean, Alexander Keith would tell you that they've been brewing the same uninterrupted recipe since 18-something, which is a complete fabrication, because Alexander Keith doesn't taste anything like an IPA. Certainly doesn't taste anything like an IPA would have tasted back when they claimed they got their original recipe. So where the modern IPA comes out of the city of San Francisco, and Fritz Maytag, the heir to the Maytag appliances fortune, when he bought the Anchor Brewery back in the late 70s, very, very early 80s, and he relaunched Anchor Steam, and then he launched in second Anchor Liberty Ale, which was a very heavily hopped pale ale, which at the time, I actually find Anchor Liberty drinks to me more like an ESB, but at the time it was so hoppy that some people couldn't drink it. There were a couple other beers that were coming out around the same time. New Albion Ale had kind of another early IPA, but basically that Pacific Northwest style, Northern California into Oregon and eventually into Washington State, they really crafted the modern IPA in the early to mid 80s, and I'd say that the style was pretty well established by 1992, 1993, and that's really where that came from. And while it was certainly usually an English yeast, definitely a pale malt backbone, the hopping would always be added at the very, very end. So rather than extracting maximum bitterness, and while they were absolutely bitter beers, you would be maximizing as much as you could aroma and flavor, understanding, of course, that these were hop varieties that were available 25, 30 years ago and have very, very little in common with the hop varieties we use today. You couldn't have made what we would call like a New England IPA back then, simply because the hop varieties that we use to make them now flatly didn't exist.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a long explanation. Sorry.
That was good.
And further proof that West Coast is best coast. Yeah, that got a little wordy. I did not. I probably could have made a much shorter answer of that.
I never read the abridged version.
Okay, so malty, rich, spicy, earthy, big pretty hop notes. it's kind of like a big, more expressive version of an ESB. And when I keep saying, well, we're going to reference it back, why don't we go ahead and do that? Let's move on here to beer number 2. Cannery Brewing's Regicide of the Star King Fresh Hopped ESB. Aaron and I went back and forth a little bit on which order to taste these in. We settled on the meats first. I hope you agree. This does have half a point fewer alcohol or less alcohol to it, but let's hope that we hope this comes together for us. Okay. Cannery Regicide of the Star King. Now, I first tasted Cannery in 2001, which was actually the same year they were founded, and it wasn't when I was here. In fall of 2001, I actually got to go to BC and I got to stay at Red Rooster. And I actually got to go to my very first winery, see my very first winemaking. I was only 19 when this happened. And while I was there, we were actually staying at Red Rooster, and just across the road in Naramata, there was the Naramata Roadhouse kind of bar. It's like a bar slash general store. It was kind of like the Twin Butte General Store almost. And they actually had Cannery Brewing Nut Brown Ale on tap. It was my very first time having, at the time, a Nut Brown Ale, and I loved it. And when I got back here a couple of years later, we actually were able to buy Cannery Nut Brown Ale in Bombers, and it was probably the very first product in the store I ever got like really excited about selling. We were selling like a case or two a week of that Nut Brown, to the point where I think I sold everybody to the point where they're absolutely sick of that beer. They also made Anarchist Amber. They made their Blackberry Porter that we still bring in every other winter or so. They make a Maple Porter. They make a bunch of cool stuff, but we've brought in some really new, interesting things from them. They've had some single hop or hop blend IPAs in kind of a New England style over the summer. We've brought them in and out a couple of times, but I really like Cannery. They're one of those foundational breweries that maybe gets overlooked a little tiny bit. I would actually argue that Mount Begbie, kind of the same thing, although Cannery does sell better than Mount Begbie, which is why I deal with Cannery. Name comes to the fact they were actually set up originally in a fruit and vegetable canning business. A closed one was where they started their first brewery, and they actually now are canning again at the Cannery. So it is once again a cannery, just of beer now. ESBs come out of the British beer scene. They are related to pale ales. This, of course, comes from the British innovation of drying grain with coke, or compressed, very clean burning coal in kilns, therefore giving you a very clean tasting, very pale colored barley that can be used to make beer. We discussed this pretty much at length when we discussed like our German lagers like Pilses and Helles and that sort of thing. ESBs are, to me, the most quintessential of the British beers. Of course, they have porter and stout and barley wine and all kinds of other things, but ESB to me is the most classic one. And it's a style that I really started out disliking because I think in large part Brewster's was making a really bad ESB at the time. And I really wanted to like ESB because I thought when I was about 20, 21 that drinking ESB made me a really cool, totally not pretentious beer drinker. And I kept drinking it, and it just tasted more and more like asparagus and broccoli, and it was really unpleasant. And that was just bad brewing at the time. Good ESB shouldn't taste terribly vegetal. It should have a rich, malty, firm backbone, and then just the lightest, prettiest amount of hops on top. You should get hop aroma and hop bitterness, but not a lot of perceptible hop flavor. So it should be not an IPA. If it's coming off like an IPA, you're leaning too far into the extra pale ale side. It should be rich and balanced and pretty. They're doing this with Comet as well as Galaxy T90, which is another new strain of Galaxy. So this should be very, very pretty indeed. Oh, it certainly smells like a bitter, doesn't it? You get that floral, almost lightly soapy characteristic from the hops, tons of spice, tons of cedar chips. They're using very new hop strains, but you could have fooled me if you told me this was being made with like East Kent Goldings. Nice save, Sky. East Kent Goldings and some other like old school styles. Yeah, 19 in 2001. Yeah, that's true. I am 39. Thanks, John, for pointing that out. Ooh, this really goes in, like there's cedar. There's almost a touch of smoke to it. The palate is firm. It's not overly sweet. I'm not picking up the cherries, though. I'll be honest. I'm not finding those. There's definitely something fruity in the nose, though. I was initially picking that up all as florals, but there's definitely a, I won't say a berry fruit, but like a fruit syrup thing in the nose. I'm smelling cherries because Craig put it in my head, but I don't think it's actually cherry in the nose. I think it's a little more non-distinct than that for me. Woodsy. I keep coming back to firm. It's got like nice graininess and then just that bitterness that it's not overly hoppy. You'd never mistake this as an IPA, but it's just the bitterness is there and it's present and it keeps you from having too large a swallow. And I really like that. It's just I mean, it's called a bitter. It's got appropriate bitterness. It's just, it's nice to drink. Yeah, definitely a hoppy smell, very distinct from an IPA, and purely because the malt base is so important to this. If you had this hopping on like a very clean, pale malt base, like if you were making, say, a West Coast IPA like, well, let's say Breakside. Breakside's a good example because their malt base is very neutral. This would just taste like dirt. You need the interplay of the sweetness of the grain with the bitterness of the hops to actually give you that, you know, suggestion of cedar wood or suggestion of wood chips or the suggestion of like almost cherry pits or florals. You need that bittersweet interplay because so many IPAs these days, not so much the meat and bounce, but let's talk about old school, well, old school. The last push of West Coast IPAs before New England came around. I'm talking about styles like, yes, Breakside, but Lagunitas was really, really good for this. I'm trying to think who else made styles really like that. I mean, lots of examples in the US. Rogue had some stuff kind of like this. The hop juice IPA that was almost water white pale with just tons of hop aroma. Those don't work here. You can't have that without this malty base. And that's what makes bitter so distinct. And yeah, apparently ESB seems to be catching on. We were a little ahead of the curve earlier this year. We got a little ahead of ourselves with our ESB love. But Cabin has a brand new ESB called Great Expectations, which I got a chance to try earlier today. That's very, very good, and we have some beer in the fridge for that. They brought back their Simple Pleasures English Mild, which is kind of a cola-colored, very easy-drinking malty beer without a lot of hop presence. That's back. We're starting to see a bit of a swing back towards some of these English styles, and I hope we see that through the winter because that would be a lot of fun. Not in our next two beers, though. Our next two beers are definitely in the full-on flavored spiced category. Oh, like what were those called? The little, those cherry blossoms? The little chocolate cherries that you bought at like the gas station?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, those are cherry blossoms, right? Yeah.
Who said that?
Chris Hunt. And yeah, I'm so happy to see Simple Pleasures back. It was a wonderful beer. And that's not the only new beer we got from Cabin. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, of course, bitter is related to pale ale related to IPA. You could even say that IPA and pale ales eventually gave root to barley wines. They're all kind of a family, but I do hold bitter apart a little bit. There are a couple other styles of bitters. You have ordinary bitter or plain bitter, which tend to be the lowest alcohol. In the UK, you'll see those dip down into the high 2s, like 2.8, 2.9% alcohol. Then you'll have best bitter, which tend to be about 4 to 4.5, and then extra special bitter or ESB tended to be 5 to 5.5% alcohol, and those historically were the only ones that got exported. For a little while there, 6-ish years ago, we actually were starting to see some of the really, really low alcohol beers and bitters and golden ales out of the UK start making their way into Alberta. That died off when kind of Blind Men opened in 2015, 2016, and all of a sudden the Alberta beer scene turned on its head, and it became wildly unprofitable within about a year to be a beer importer because Alberta was making better beer than we could import. So suddenly all that cool stuff that we were getting from the UK and from Belgium to a point, and certainly from the United States, kind of dried up. Like at one point we had like 15, 18 SKUs just from Montana, and then Blind Men happened and everything changed. So I'm kind of sad we don't see those ultra low alcohol examples anymore. They were really good, but I'm just glad we're still seeing some really fun bitters. Oh yeah, and for those of you, yeah, it's been a bit of a, if we could put it on the tasting, it comes in a big 650ml glass bottle, which is why we haven't done in the tasting, but Hoyne has a really spectacular English ale. I don't think they're calling it a bitter, they call it like Appleton's Finest. It's really something exceptional. Mike found it, I didn't, but I think they're only like $6 a bomber, and they're just spectacular. All right, well, I think it's time to completely change gears here and get out of the ESBs and extra pale ales and get into some wintry flavored stouts and porters. And hold on to your hats, that's something we're going to dig into a lot more next week. By the way, we're not going to talk about it till after this beer, but I'm really proud of what we got for you next week. Next week's going to be fun. Okay, so our next two beers. We have another Annex beer. This is part of their new small release series. As part of them getting out of the meets and bounds, Annex has also readdressed their seasonals program. They were for a while doing a winter seasonal, a summer seasonal, and they'd be available for about 6 months each. And they kind of do small batch beers when they felt like it. They've realized that while that was fun and that worked up to a point, it only worked if everybody liked the winter or summer seasonal. So they've decided not to do that as much anymore, and they're going to be doing not so much a seasonal as always just having a rotating line of always kind of a new small batch beer, very similar to what we see 88 or Cabin or anybody else doing. So this is one of the first in that series. And while everybody else was busy doing a pumpkin beer, Annex said, you know, pumpkin beer is kind of done to death. It's a bit over to the top. Let's take that idea and let's dial back that big pumpkin-y flavor a little bit. Let's use sweet potatoes, both roasted and fresh. Let's add those traditional kind of fall spices. But the fun thing about being in retail, pumpkin beer sells really, really, really well until November 1st. And then everybody says, oh yeah, it's not Halloween anymore. And then just we put it in the clearance rack and hope someone buys it before it goes bad. By calling it a sweet potato porter, they don't limit themselves. These are still fall flavors, but I mean, you can kind of drink this between Canadian and American Thanksgiving. It's still perfectly appropriate. Like, this will do just nicely till you start feeling like Christmas flavors. God help you, I don't want to drink another beer with juniper in it, but we've got one coming. Not tonight, but we do have one coming.
I'd give that a whirl.
I don't mind Christmas beers, I just don't like when they're over the top sweet, and they are so often over the top sweet. This, however, is not. And if you think this is sweet when you first taste it, have a little nip of ice cutter and then come back to this. It's drier than you think. Either that or ice cutter might be just a touch on the sweet side.
Yeah, true.
Okay, so what do we get on this? Well, you get the cloves and the cinnamon and the ginger right away. That's the very first flavor here. It's big, it's gingerbready, it's Christmas cake, it's spice cake, and I think what they're actually going for is like American Thanksgiving candied yams, but I've never actually had those. The idea of like marshmallows on an already sweet vegetable with a bunch of crap in it has never really appealed to me. And I'm someone who grew up with ambrosia salad at every family dinner, so
Aspic.
I also had aspic growing up, tomato aspic with little tiny canned shrimp and green peas in it.
Lark's tongue.
Sorry, you had what?
Nothing. Lark's tongue. Lark's tongue and aspic. It's a
Did you have that growing up?
prog rocker record.
Yeah, okay, never mind.
reference.
Never mind.
Oops, no, I did it. Well, that was yours.
It's even now.
Sorry.
Bubblegum heavy flavor.
Holy cow.
I would actually say I think it's the cinnamon that's leaning into like the double bubble, like hard pink bubble gum a little tiny bit more than I think it's Hefeweizen, but I'm right there with you. I just think it's the spices, not the yeast here. But if anyone wants to wildly disagree, I will certainly listen to that. There's no vanilla, which I think is nice, because we're gonna get lots of it here. And I think so many pumpkin beers will lean a little bit into the vanilla, and I think that adds too much sweetness. I appreciate how dry this is. Caramel yumminess, yes, there's definitely caramel here. But I don't know, to me this isn't over the top sweet. It reminds me more than anything of like gingerbread or ginger snaps. Nutmeg, yeah, like it's a drier sort of confection than say pumpkin pie.
Molasses.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, molasses cookies, I think that's very fair.
If you eat a sweet potato raw, they leave this really starchy kind of layer in your mouth. It's almost.
Why are you
dries
eating
your
sweet
mouth out.
potatoes
Well,
raw?
sometimes they're nice to snack on.
You make them sound so appealing with the way they leave this layer of slick nastiness in the inside of your mouth, but they're nice to snack on.
Nastiness. It's just it's a starchy slick. I don't know.
Sky, do you eat sweet potatoes raw?
I do not.
No, because you're not a fucking crazy person. Right, thank you.
Especially not as a light afternoon snack.
No!
They're
Maybe on a
refreshing.
bet.
Actually,
They're
better than
refreshing.
you think. Yeah. Just pop one sometime.
I like how you tried to save this. It's not savable, Aaron.
Not bad.
Yeah, and it does start with weight and it ends fresh. That's an interesting way of putting it because this could so easily swerve into being sickly, sickly sweet. And I don't think it does. I think it ends with a very nice like crackle of cinnamon and ginger and again that molasses, but almost finishes a touch peppery and it keeps it refreshing. I think this is the same way that like bitterness in IPA keeps it from being too sweet. Because again, if this didn't have any bitterness, it wouldn't work. I think here, rather than using hop bitterness, they're using that hard like ginger sip snap of spice to keep this refreshing and keep you coming back, because if it didn't have that, and if it was even just a touch sweeter, I think this would become very cloying and you get very sick of the spices very, very quickly. In the same way that I have one pumpkin spice latte from Starbucks every single fall and I never want another one until the next year comes along, because they're simply too sweet. Shredded sweet potato on a salad. Okay, yes, but if you put shredded sweet potato on a salad, I'm going to think it's cheddar cheese, and then I'm going to be bitterly disappointed when it's in fact sweet potato. Okay, so I see that we are now putting the camera on the beer tasting coming up. So I guess I should probably talk about that since these two put all this effort into it.
That's your cue.
So let's talk about what we've got coming up next week. And I did that just to mess with Aaron because he was giving Sky such a hard time on his camera work. So I decided to just take a big step to the left. So let's talk about what we have coming next week. This is one that I've had in the back of my head for a couple of weeks now, at least. So I wanted to do a chocolate tasting. Nothing but chocolate beers for a week, and we've actually managed to put it together. And I almost had this as the Nanaimo Bar porter from Vancouver Island Brewing, but I managed to get this at the last second and pull it all together, so they're just chocolate beers. So we're going to open with the Young's Double Chocolate Stout. This is the one that we've been carrying since about 2006. This is the classic chocolate stout. We have to do it if we're going to do a chocolate stout tasting. And I'm calling it a chocolate beer tasting, but thank God we don't have a chocolate IPA because instead we actually all have stouts. Next up, from Moody, these are the guys who make Flamingos and the Lavender Sour. They've actually got a brand new chocolate oatmeal stout for us. Haven't tasted this one. It's the only one on the table I haven't tasted. But I mean, it's Moody. They're not going to make a bad beer. And if it does, well, we'll have a whole hour to make fun of it next week. Moving right along, then we get into the high test stuff. These are both around 11.5% alcohol, part of why they come in small cans. From Cabin, this is the Fuego. And I apologize to anyone who called the store in the last 2 weeks and asked if we were getting Fuego, and I said no, because I really didn't think we were going to, because they made it last year, and we kind of spoiled it before Cabot actually announced it anywhere, which is why I am now so careful about what I can and can't say on camera. It's because Fuego last year, I announced it before Cabot did, and it was a tiny bit of a faux pas. So this is their Mexican hot chocolate imperial stout. So you've got milk chocolate, you've got hot peppers. I had one last night. It's absolutely tremendous. Wow, does that hot pepper stay with you though? This is one you might want to share with somebody, because that hot pepper is gonna stick with you.
Crazy.
And then we have Origin of Darkness. Now, yes, this is Collective Arts. Yes, this is a imperial stout with a lot of ingredients from exactly the same brewery that made all the things. However, it's absolutely incredible. Now, as of where I'm standing right now, we still have 4 different Origin of Darkness beers in the store, all of them different. Collective Arts is a collaborating brewery on all 4, but they each are in collaboration with a different craft brewery from around the world. They all use different ingredients. There's a peanut butter and chocolate one. There's a variety of different ones. Can't remember what they all are. This was the only one I could get multiple flats of, and this is in collaboration with Garage Project out of Wellington. So this is a New Zealand craft brewery that actually did this in collaboration with Collective Arts. So it's an imperial stout, Asian oak barrels, and finished in tawny port barrels. And then they added New Zealand Pinot Noir, South Pacific Vanilla, and New Zealand Cocoa. So that sounds a lot like all the things. And you're probably thinking, oh God, Kyle, what have you done again? No. These beers are, let me put it this way. Devin does not really like beer. He certainly despises sweet beer, and he never likes strong beer. He loves all 4 of them. They're incredible beers. I'd actually have loved to have done like a tasting of these, but they cost us like $24 a 4-pack, so I couldn't really do it for $20. But we can afford to put one in anyway. So that's what we have next week. It's our chocolate week, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, this one's going to be fun. All right, let's move on to Snake Lake. Their perennial bestseller every winter for us these last couple of winters. It's Ice Cutter. We all love Ice Cutter. It was a massive smash hit the very first time we tasted it with the guys from Snake Lake live on camera. They've switched from being the 6-pack of small cans to the 4-pack of tall cans. Really excited for that. Think it's going to be a better seller because nobody buys anything in 6-packs anymore. I like having this in the shop because it's fun. I will say, having this next to the sweet potato porter, it's a lot sweeter than I remember. Let's hope it doesn't taste. Let's hope it doesn't taste too sweet. Oh, and I actually did want to thank everybody. The last time we did a tasting, I mentioned that we were doing advent calendars, beer and wine. We put those out at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday last week. By 11 o'clock Saturday morning, we were completely out of beer and wine. We had 12 wine calendars at $300 a piece, and we had 24 beer calendars, 120. They're all completely gone. We're actually going to make another round, and we kind of planned on making another round of beer calendars. We had no idea the wine calendars would go that fast, so we are going to make another round of those. So those should be out sometime next week because we still have a week to make them. So, Snake Lake, of course, out of Sylvan Lake, Alberta. This is their coffee and vanilla stout. They call it a vanilla latte stout. It is a lactose stout, so they have used milk sugar. I think that's where they're getting the latte side from. It's big, it's sweet. You get tons of vanilla, but it's not coming off like good humor artificial vanilla. It's not coming off like fake vanilla ice cream. It's just coming off very ethereal and very gentle. And I like the coffee notes here too. They're very subtle, but they're definitely there. I've always thought that the coffee in this kind of smells a bit like Tim Hortons coffee, which is not something I drink very often, but I've had enough in my life to remember how it smells. I like that. I like how roasty that is. Yes, it's very, very sweet, but you get it in your mouth, and it's... I'm going to put it this way. It's like one of those really, really bad for you, like, coffee smoothies you get like places like Booster Juice, or not like an ice cap, because I think ice caps are gross, but like a good frozen blended coffee. It kind of reminds me of one of those, and those are a bit of a guilty pleasure for me. Yeah, I also like that it's in tall cans. It was time. I had this conversation actually with the folks from Hell's Basement, who actually will be joining us not next week, but the week after for a bit of a brewery profile tasting. So spoiler alert, we're going to do Hell's Basement in 2 weeks. And we were talking a little bit about where they're priced, how their beers are packaged, where they're positioned in the market, and how maybe just putting the exact same beer in a tall can would give them a little more shelf presence and a little more of a premium image. So yeah, I don't know, we had an interesting conversation about packaging and the difference it makes. I think that packaging in a tall can in this market kind of says you're serious about your beer. I like 6-pack small cans, but at this point I think me and a lot of other people associate that with Bud Light. And that's not a slight on anyone who chooses to package in small cans. 33 Acres still does, for example, and their beer rules. But yeah, I think, at least in a public perception sort of way, if you're not packaging in tall cans, you don't look like you're serious about it. Yeah, exactly, like those Starbucks, like the really, really bad for you ones that you get like the convenience store, the pre-mixed cold coffees that are like really good, but you feel really bad about yourself for buying and you realize you paid $4 for that. Yeah, it's like one of those, except it has alcohol in it, so it's even worse for you, but it feels better. Oh yeah, Craig's, well, R.I.P. Craig. We'll miss Craig. He died. He's dead now.
He died on the toilet.
Too much, he died on the toilet, like Elvis. Craig's not going to like that comment. Well, we lost the top fed tonight, but how much more trouble can we get into? No. Rankings on these are going to be really tough because they're very, very different. I'm actually going to say I like the ESB better than I like the Meats and Bounds. And I'm going to kind of be mean to Annex tonight and say I actually like the Ice Cutter more than I like the Sweet Potato. You know what? The Ice Cutter is too sweet. The Ice Cutter is not as well balanced. The Ice Cutter is not as creative or as interesting as the Comfortable Deception. I still would rather drink Ice Cutter. It is absolutely one of those pre-packed Starbucks over-sweetened things, but you know what? They sell millions of those for a reason. It's delicious, and I don't feel very much shame at all picking that over the porter. In the vacuum between these two, I actually think I would give it to the Cannery. In a vacuum between these two, I don't know. They're just too different for me. But these two are all about hedonism. And I think I'm going to give it to the Ice Cutter just by a nose, although I really like that ESB. And Deirdre's looking at the bright side. Awesome. Well, I'll wait for a few more rankings to come in, and I will see you folks next week for chocolate, which I gotta say, if you're only gonna come to one more this year, this one. If you haven't had the Origin of Darknesses, oh my god, they're just ridiculously good. Dude, it's 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. 4, 1, 2, 3. Cool. I like that 4 is kind of coming in first. I worry how much I bias people when I give my ranking first. Maybe I should give mine at the end, but 2, 1, 4, 3, but you'll buy 3. That's fair. And I don't have a lot of Comfortable Deception left, so 4, 2, 3, 1. Okay. Yeah, I think John and I are exactly the same on this one, so
2, 3, 1, 4.
2, 3, 1, 4. All right.
Yeah.
Fair enough. You don't like the ice cutter, Aaron.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Don't dislike it.
4-3-1-2. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of stuff.
It's one of those things where fourth place is not a.
You know what? There are tastings where
You're a loser.
fourth place
You know.
is definitely a badge of dishonor. But those are fairly rare. Those are nights like all the things or
Choose
the.
good beer. I don't know.
Well, what's this wee stuff? You haven't picked a beer yet in a year and a half, Aaron.
Okay.
It's this wee.
The producer's curation's coming in the new year.
Actually, you know what? That's going to be a fun one. Coming up soon,
Yeah.
Aaron picks the
Aaron
beers.
picks the beer. Kyle does the live stream.
Yeah. And actually, we could even do that. Ooh, Aaron, we could do that blind.
Okay, blindfolds on even.
I don't know how the heck we do that because I'd actually have to be in the store for a week while we sold them, though. Actually, we could like paper bag them.
We'll work out the logistics.
We can work out.
Oh, I like blind though. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
good.
so we put
Paper
all the
bag's a
4
good
pack.
one.
Yeah, we put all the 4 packs into paper bags.
Yeah.
And so I'd never be able to see them. We'd staple them close so
Yeah.
I couldn't peek.
Yeah.
And we'd sell them that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, we could do that.
Good.
Yeah, that's something we could come up with for next year.
Okay.
That'll probably be sometime in January. But yeah, thanks everybody. This was fun. We'll see you all next week. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Good night.